you. So we've all got crystal balls that don't work or have led us astray in the past. An amazingly unpredictable week ahead. But let's try and work out one particular question. Do we think we'll have indicative votes, so you MPs taking charge, or do you think we'll have the meaningful vote, so the government coming forward and pushing it to a final say? Gillian first.
Well, we could have both. I would imagine that we probably will have indicative votes. I think the government may put forward a motion, or if not, there will be a backbencher that will, or a group of backbenchers that will. The indicative votes is some way to try and decide if MPs don't want the Prime Minister's deal or the EU negotiated deal, what deal do they want?
Do you guys not know what you think about this question now? It's been 2 years.
I think people know what they think. What they don't is they don't have an agreed position on things that are available. So, you know, some people want to have no deal, for example. Would that get through Parliament? Probably not. Some people want a second referendum. Would that get through Parliament? Probably not, although it could change. You know, what type of arrangements do we want? So there's all too many opinions about what we don't want. And I think the answer we need to get to is what is the majority in Parliament in favour of.
Do you think we'll have votes on both, Alan?
I think we probably will.
All right. Oh, so you think there will be a meaningful vote?
Well, I think that's more in the balance than indicative votes, because the meaningful vote a third time is obviously partly in the hands of the Speaker as to whether what is put forward is significantly different to even be debated. And in any event, it continues to be a question mark against it as to whether the Prime Minister would put it forward if she thought it was going to lose again.
I mean, you've studied the Constitution over many years. Yes. These are going to be textbook questions, aren't they? You know, should the Speaker have done this? Should the Queen get involved?
Yeah, there will be tomes written on this, yes, in years to come. Yeah. And the problem is, in terms of things like the indicative vote, is you don't have the luxury of sitting back and saying, well, what does this mean constitutionally over a long period of time? Because these are things we've got to decide, yes, probably in the next week or so, to keep the process on the road to the extent that we can get anything coherent out at the end. So the indicative vote process is going to rather be not necessarily what people would like in an ideal world, but actually where we're going to go from now in terms of the extraordinary mess that we are in at the minute.
Compromise.
Yeah. Public opinion as well follows, leads sometimes. The big march, which we saw, which was intended to impress people like you two. And then the petition, people coming back from the march, presumably in their pyjamas last night, signing up to it, getting their kids to sign up to it, possibly, I've heard. I mean, but it's getting towards 5 million. Does that make a difference to you, Gillian?
Well, I mean, of course these things make a difference, but the reality is 16.1 million people voted to remain in the European Union during the last vote, you know, during the referendum.
Does that still count? It was a while ago now.
I think so. You know, one of the things I've found, and I think somebody asked a question in a big audience recently, how many people have actually changed their mind? Not entrenched, but changed. Very few, well, only from polling, very few people, and I've met very few people who've actually changed their mind. People have got more, you know, entrenched into their own position, more fearful about what it meant or what it means now, but actually changing their mind. And I think this isn't just a poll or, you know, a question that we can ask every time. This is, as Alan said, a massive constitutional change, one that hasn't been done in recent history by any parliament, one that, you know, no other country has left the European Union using Article 50. These are monumentous historic moments, and you know, we did have a referendum. I know some people would like to redo the referendum, but also that's got implications for our democracy. Democracy is the oldest, probably one of the oldest and most respected democracies in the world, and that requires consent. That requires that you listen.
Many would say.
I think it can be. It depends what we do now.
Right.
I think if we actually, to me, a second referendum undermines democracy. I've heard glibly people say you can't get too much democracy. Yes, you can. If you're ignoring previous votes, you can absolutely have too much democracy.
Alan, there's one particular of the indicative votes, this amendment from Peter Kyle Wilson, which is it could be you might have to vote on, and various people within the Labour Party, Tom Watson included, saying that they might go for it, so that pass Theresa May's deal, but then have a referendum.
Yeah,
Would you go with that?
I think to some extent that bridges some of the concerns that Gillian's put forward about the question of the referendum and where you go from there, and have people change their minds. But should there be an option which actually enables all the possible differences of opinion to be reconciled into a vote? So to say, well, Theresa May's deal actually didn't get the support of Parliament, maybe it could get better support in the country. There is a very substantial groundswell. We've seen that from the demonstrations and the petition to actually change course as far as future Brexit is concerned. So to put that into a ratificatory vote seems to me to be the right course of action now in order to try and bring the future together.
You can call it ratificatory. At the end of the day, you've said you'd like us to stay in the European Union. You would campaign for that in a referendum. So really, that's what you're campaigning for if you're asking for another vote, isn't it?
If the choice was that we have the Theresa May deal or staying in the EU, that's to some extent a choice between what's the best deal for the country. And actually the best deal for the country we would have for the future is the deal we've got now. Now then, there's a question of what other factors do you bring to bear in terms of our future direction as a country. And so having a referendum of that kind would enable those different choices to be put back to the country again. And I think at that point, and here's the real problem we've got at the moment, is that we're not moving towards a solution which can actually, as it were, put a cap on where we start moving for the future one way or another. That's what we've got to do in the next week, literally, to get ourselves in a position where we know where we're going, and at least this stops so that we can actually get on with the rest of our lives.
That might be a reason for having a referendum, Gillian Keegan. The deal goes through and then people have to approve it.
It's a people's vote in disguise. They're all about having another vote. Now, Alan just said something there, which is, you know, the best deal is the one we've got. The one thing we absolutely know is the last referendum, people judged what we had today, today's deal,
assuming
versus
they
leaving.
Didn't know what they were voting for.
Well, I think this is incredibly complex stuff. That's true. And it will be incredibly complex when it goes back again. And that's why I think it's an abdication of our duty. I honestly think, you know, reading 597 pages of a withdrawal agreement, I've done 3 times, I'm sure you've pored over it, reading the political declaration, understanding regulatory alignment, customs unions, what this means to various industries, WTO, how it applies to industries, what it means to our economy, that's complex stuff. If we're seriously expecting, you know, constituents to have an informed decision, it actually is a very complicated decision. It's almost like a whole of economy decision, and therefore I think it's an abdication of our duty. As we're proving in Parliament, it's almost proving too big for Parliament. So therefore we need to make sure that as politicians we do this heavy duty lifting for our constituents and come to a decision on what deal we will accept.
OK, thanks both of you. Now, still to come on today's show, dogs may be man's best friend, but are local councils becoming a bit dog unfriendly?
I think the majority of dog walkers understand that they've got to pick up after their dogs, and I think the majority of dog walkers would understand that they've got to place their dog on a lead if requested to so by an authorised person. I think that's just common sense.
Oh, that's a contentious subject. And this week there's been a lot of noise made about the future of the UK's live music industry. A new report by the Culture Select Committee was enthusing about past success and a once thriving pool of talent, but also warned that the music industry faces stark challenges. So is it looking at a long fade to silence? The live music industry injects around £1 billion a year to the UK economy, but the report found there's been an unprecedented number of music venues that have had to close. Many of the venues that are still open face a perfect storm of challenges, including rising rents and business rates, pressure from property development and stagnating incomes, all of which threaten their long-term viability. In Southampton, Talking Heads closed its doors last year after a lengthy battle to stay open. And in Oxford, The Cellar closed last week after nearly 40 years of gigs. The owners say they've crunched the numbers 1,000 times over and come to the conclusion they can't continue. In Oxford, the estimated total annual spend on live music is £10.5 million and provides around 350 jobs.
there have been calls to review business rates for the live music sector to help struggling venues, and a plea for more investment to develop new talent.
Joining me now, Paul Burrows from the Musicians' Union. The Select Committee acknowledged problems of live music. Business rates at venues they thought was something in particular. But then festivals are thriving. So is it just one area losing out and the other not?
To a certain extent it is. Festivals are effectively pop-up events, so they can base their business model around only having to exist for 3 or 4 days a year, whereas your grassroots music venue is a business that is running probably maybe 5 nights a week, some of them even 7 nights a week, and they have different pressures, and obviously the rates that a festival pay can be factored into the ticket prices, which, if you think about Glastonbury, that sells out before they announce the lineup. So that's not the same as a local grassroots venue trying to attract an audience to back the bands that they're putting on.
I mean, people are still prepared to pay a lot of money, aren't they, for big stadium concerts or festivals?
They are indeed, yes.
But what you're saying is we need something, a different approach maybe to the local venue that encourages new talent, particularly. In a way, is it discrimination? Because there's often money pumped into other forms of arts in a local area.
I think discrimination's a bit of a strong word to use for it. I think so. I think that the grassroots contemporary music scene is probably the only part of the UK music industry, live performance-wise, that doesn't get any government.
Yeah, but opera does.
Opera does, yes.
You know, art, all sorts of local art gets money.
But that's not contemporary grassroots music, which is why I'm saying they're not. But if you want to talk about being discriminatory, you talk about...
Where's the music? Where's the money for grime?
Well, I'm going to say you could go back to the dreaded Form 696 from the Metropolitan Police, risk assessment form, that actively discriminated against urban music.
Really?
So that's been withdrawn now, which is we're really grateful of. But there's a legacy to that. That in some areas you're still finding grime artists and hip-hop artists can't get live music engagements because of the fear the venue owners have and promoters have regarding the
even when
the
Stormzy's been #1
indeed
album.
Yes,
Crazy.
Because Stormzy is a massive artist, of course, but for every Stormzy there's going to be 100, 200 lower level grime and hip-hop
I won't tell you what my wife describes the lyrics as. she has a form when she hears it from the kids, but anyway. So music education as well. I mean, that's another thing the Musicians' Union has looked at.
Indeed.
And that's in a lot of schools, it's just not there for all pupils, is it? Maybe the specialist colleges that produce Adele and all the rest of it, wonderful.
Well, if you want to have a thriving music scene, especially grassroots music scene, you've got to start musicians somewhere, and it starts at school with education. And there is a crisis in music education funding. To be honest with you, the way it's now funded through the hubs for music education in each area.
It's supposed to be getting a new initiative, isn't it?
It's supposed to be. That has from 2020 onwards. That hasn't come out yet. It's still in development, I believe. But learning music is almost becoming going back to those who can afford it, can access it, and that's totally wrong. I think it should be accessed for everybody. It not only creates a better learning environment for children if they learn music, but it gives people the opportunity, and there's not that equality of opportunity.
Places like Southampton, Alan, you know, that prides itself on a bit of arts and culture, applied for, I think, the Cultural City of the Year. I mean, but we've got to do for the regular venues as well, haven't we? And Talking Heads closed down in Southampton.
Well, that's the centrepiece of the problem, because what's happening in the recorded music world is that you no longer get much money from selling records anymore, because that's all changed.
All gone internet.
And the money for bands these days is from live performing. And if the venues for those live performances are just disappearing from under their feet, then the whole ecology of how live music works goes. And we've seen in Southampton some really venerable venues have had to go under, not their own fault really, but because of the finances of how that works. And I mean, I think it's a good thing in Southampton generally that actually the live music scene has blossomed generally, but it's on a very, very fragile basis. And I think we need to have a much clearer view, and I think the Select Committee report has been very important in this, a much clearer view of how all that is supported in the future. Because I mean, what we see from Southampton is that some huge bands, you know, Nirvana and Foo Fighters and Coldplay, have played in tiny venues in Southampton in their time, and then have gone on to the big time. Yeah. But if those venues weren't there, then what would their path have been?
And it's a huge industry for the country, isn't it? When we're talking about making it in the world on our own, this is somewhere where we should be investing.
Oh, massively. And it's also, I mean, it's 1 billion, I think, the size of the live music industry, but I think there's about 4 billion in music tourism on top of that, and the music industry itself is much bigger.
We're off to Liverpool.
And of course, well, you know, you know, obviously Liverpool's my home city, so it's in your DNA in Liverpool. I mean, you know, every Liverpudlian's been in the Cavern several times, and you know, you talk about big bands. The Beatles started, you know, in a tiny place in Liverpool. And you know, my mother used to go in her lunch hour from, you know, the factory she worked in down the road. That's how accessible live music was. That's how much it is part of the culture. And it is, as Alan says,
could do that
part
everywhere.
of the whole ecosystem. I think the government actually has listened to a lot of the Select Committee report, so it's putting in extra funding. I think it's £800,000 for music hubs, for more school places for children to learn. It's changed the business rates, obviously, for small businesses in general, including a lot of live music venues. Noise disruption was actually one of the problems that a lot of live music venues have had. It's changed the planning laws, or it's doing that at the moment, to say if a live music venue is there and you build houses, you have to get them soundproofed. That was there before the houses were there. So it's changing the kind of, you know, where it sits. And it's also changed ticketing. I think it's banned illegal, you know, these bots that buy all the tickets that make ticketing more expensive, which then put, you know, in the value chain, give them to somebody that actually shouldn't have it. It should be going to the bands, to the venues, to the people who are putting on the live performance. And it's absolutely vital that we all, you know, the young bands, both of my stepsons played in bands. You know, I've been a part-time roadie many times, having the biggest car, so, you know, which was taking the drums, taking, you know, taking their stuff from place to place. And, you know, and that's a key part of them getting that exposure to live music.
Good. We're glad that politicians are talking about it, aren't we? Thank you very much. Chances are many of you today have already been out taking the dog for a walk, but surrounding that stroll, also, there's a whole host of rules and regulations, where you can and can't go, so to speak, how many pooches you can walk at any one time, even the length of lead you're allowed to use, as our Dorset reporter Tristan Pascoe has been finding out. It's a bit of a dog's breakfast.
It's mid-morning, time for Kate Ward, 80 years old today, to exercise her dogs.
Back in the day, eccentric dog lady Camberley Kate won the nation's hearts, rescuing, caring for and walking hundreds of dogs. Couldn't walk that many dogs today. It's just one of the things that councils are cracking down on. Dog don'ts, as well as dog do.
Most responsible pet owners know it's important to clean up behind their dogs. The health implications of leaving dog mess lying around are well known, especially where there are children playing. For councils, it's a dirty and smelly problem. So, I brought my dog Kramer along for a little walk to see what councils are doing to tackle the issue. Come on, let's go.
One council has found a novel way of highlighting the fouling issue.
It's quite an obvious and in-your-face tactic. It's something which we borrowed from other organisations who've had success with it in the past, and we've seen it really make a difference on our sites too.
I've got to ask, why don't you just pick it up?
Well, the idea behind it is we're hoping to change people's behaviours. If we were to go around and tidy up after them, nobody would really notice there was a problem. But actually we're trying and encourage people to be responsible dog owners and to pick it up themselves, because we haven't unfortunately got enough people to go around and pick up after everyone.
There's a bit of confusion, as councils don't all do things the same way. Oxford uses PSPOs, where dogs have to be on a lead in all prescribed areas. Reading also uses public space protection orders, the type normally used to curb antisocial behaviour or street drinking. Gosport in Hampshire has a maximum number of dogs that can be walked at any one time. And all along the south coast, dogs are banned from the beaches from May to October, although some places like Weymouth, dogs are allowed on part of the beach all year round.
Here in North Dorset, new rules come into force at the end of the month that will see dogs banned entirely from marked pitches where sport is being played. Dogs will be banned from all children's play areas like this. The fine for allowing your dog to foul is going up from £80 to £100. They're even bringing in a maximum length of lead of 6'6".
What we did is went out to public consultation. That's really key, because we said to the public, what do you want to see? And overwhelmingly the public said, look, we want to see more dogs on leads and we want more fines for dogs that foul on public lands. And we also want those restrictions on sports pitches.
Fenton's deer worrying in Richmond Park went viral for obvious reasons. But the new restrictions coming in will also impact on professional dog walkers like Amanda and her team.
It is confusing. I mean, for us it won't pose a problem because we do sort of abide by those regulations anyway. But places like parks and things like that where we would walk dogs in towns, it is going to be tricky because we're not going to be allowed to walk them at all, so that will be difficult. It's the people locally, I feel, that will struggle the most. You know, the elderly or disabled people who might want to just a little easy walk around the park with the dog and are not going to be able to at all. Not being able to walk them at all is going to be a problem for local people, I think.
Others too are not sure about some of the new rules.
Can a dog get enough exercise on a shorter lead?
You see plenty of people down here with these sort of throwing devices, balls, and dogs having a wonderful time chasing around and playing with each other. I think it would be a shame to just put them on leads, all of them.
You see some dogs, you know, they run loose and then they come across and then they cause havoc with your dog, you know, and the person don't bother to call it back. I'm 5'3", so I don't know.
It's understandable that councils want dogs to be under control, but it is a confusing picture.
It seems very strange. I mean, if there should be, it should be a national. If it's going to happen, it should be national, and then people know where they stand. Because obviously we're quite close to the Wiltshire border and the Somerset border, so people will be coming in. They won't know that they're not allowed, you know, to walk the dogs or what the regulations are for that county. So I think it needs to be across the board, really, if we're going to do something.
So if we're measuring the length of lead, is that anti-dog or is that sensible regulation, Gillian?
Well, I think what they're trying to do, the big picture is they're trying to get all dog owners to be, you know, quite responsible by picking up, you know, dog fowl, you saw the pictures there, I think
Which a responsible owner would want.
Absolutely, and I think the lead length thing was, and also the number of dogs on lead was specifically aimed at something you didn't used to see, but you see a lot more now, which is dog daycare. You know, going out. You know, you see sometimes sort of 8 and 10 dogs, you know, with one person, and I guess they're trying to put some sort of what works safely in those cases.
Difficult to legislate. We saw with dangerous dogs, didn't we, Alan?
Yes, I mean there is a difficulty of. Sometimes on a knee-jerk response, legislating nationally for a perceived problem which perhaps you need to think about on a longer-term basis. And also there's the question in terms of local authority regulation of the very different circumstances that local authorities are in concerning dogs. So an urban authority will have particular concerns about dog walking, and if someone with 10 dogs on the lead is walking around an urban area. That's
different
a bit
on
of
the South Downs.
That's a bit of a problem. Very different if you're in a rural area. And those sort of problems come with sheep worrying and
it's a big problem.
whether the dogs can run free, and not just sheep worrying, but what happens with the rural environment with dogs just running free and scaring local wildfowl and various wild animals. So I think you've got very different circumstances, and I think the local authorities are the right body to continue to regulate this, but the overall reflection needs to be on responsible dog ownership, and actually that's, I think, changed very positively over recent years.
It has improved, hasn't it?
But you've still got situations where unbelievably thoughtless dog owners are still, so to speak, fouling it for everybody else.
Well, that's the last pun on that one, thank you. Now, our regular roundup of the political week in the South, ancient and modern, as always, in just 60 seconds.
A gold makeover for George III in Weymouth, thanks to a government grant. Along with the statue of the man who made the Dorset seaside popular, the magnificent 7 Victorian shelters are getting a lick of paint. Another Dorset treasure, Kingston Lacey, was embroiled in controversy this week after the local Portman Hunt saw their licence to hunt there cancelled by the National Trust over claims hounds illegally killed a fox. Salisbury's ancient city is set to be transformed by world-leading fibre-optic internet. The Chancellor came to check out plans for 1 gigabit per second connection, fast enough to watch 200 HD movies at once.
It'll be the first time a whole city has been completely fibred in this way.
And finally, a Milton Keynes school assembled an army of Mechamon robots this week to prove that technology is fun.
They might have sort of written themselves off of, you know, I'm finding science really boring. Actually, no, this is about having ideas.
That sounds like a great promise for Salisbury. It'll be by this time next year, I think, that they're saying they're going to put fibre into 20,000 homes from a start.
Yeah.
And that's in a medieval city as well. You know? You'd like that for Chichester, is what you're going to say.
100% would like it for Chichester.
Yeah.
I'd like it for every city across the country. And I think that is part of the investment that the Chancellor's committed to in terms of making sure that we have the latest and greatest modern technology all over the country. Obviously, you do have some hard-to-reach places, which we have got plenty in the Chichester district, but there's other solutions to solve them as well. It's vital.
I've got a technical problem, though. Will he be the Chancellor this time next year?
Yes. I hope so. I mean, I think he's doing a really good job.
Can she keep any promises, leaving on the 29th of March?
I think so. And, this isn't about the individuals. We're trying to do something massive. This is about actually Parliament trying to come to an agreement. And actually, it doesn't really matter in one way or the other about particular individuals. But the Prime Minister, there is nobody who's worked harder to get this country, in the country's national interest, than the Prime Minister in the last few years.
So the promises for Salisbury, which may or may not be kept. What about the government? Can we believe anything now?
Well, I don't think we can. I mean, I think by my observation, both the process of government has pretty much completely broken down.
Okay. So you think Salisbury won't get their fibre? I mean, really?
I hope that the things of the real world will continue, but next week will tell us how well that's going to happen. Let's
look to next week. That's all from us. Thank you to my guests, Gillian, Keegan and Alan Whitehead. Goodbye.